Hey guys, welcome back to the Art of Craftsmanship. My name's Dustin, and I've been in the shop kind of organizing and setting some stuff up recently. So I have my new grinder station all set up with the Revolution grinder and my 2x42. We've got our new Art of Craftsmanship sign behind it, and we moved the bookshelf that was there across the room and have that reorganized and set up in a new space. I've also picked up some new supplies. I've got some new Blue Dykem, I got G-Flex epoxy, I picked up some Corby bolts and a new Bill Behnke File guide, as well as Brian from the YouTube channel Housework was really gracious and sent me some really beautiful stabilized maple. All that being said, let's make a new knife. We've got everything ready to go, and I have a new design that I've been coming up with. Now, this is a design that I have thought about for the last couple years, milled over, and kind of really recently put this onto paper. Now, the design is basically a simplified puukko. Now, the puukko style, and it's going to be a full tang knife. Now, I have two different prototypes here. One was a little shorter at first, and then I kind of lengthened a little bit. And my final design, which I'm really happy with, is a 3.5-inch blade and a 4.25-inch handle. So very simplified, very simple shape, but something really nice, kind of fairly small that you could wear as an EDC, everyday carry knife, and also use it just as well with any bushcrafting or camping. Now, I want to make this knife, and I want to kind of live with it over the summer and use it and really get a feel for it. And then by the end of the summer, I'll kind of make any changes that I want to if I need to, or if not, then I'll have, you know, this kind of great knife that I've used, and I'll really be able to make a full run of knives, maybe a small batch, but maybe 8 or so knives that I'll be able to sell to you guys if you're interested. And that will be through Instagram and through YouTube as well. Now, the first thing I want to do before I start this is I want to make a template of the actual knife shape. And I want to do that because if it does turn out that I actually really like it and I don't really need to make any changes, then I'll have the template to be able to start tracing from in the future. Now, with this template that I drew up, I wanted something to be fairly repeatable and easy to draw from. So the entire rectangle that the knife inside of is 1 1/8 inch tall. It's going to be 7 3/4 inches long because I'm going to add an additional 1/4 inch here. At the end of the tang, it'll be 1 inch tall, and then it'll come up 2 inches to the middle of the handle. It'll be flat from there to the middle of the entire knife, and then from the midpoint down to the 1/8, it'll just be a straight line straight down. And I also have a curve that goes from the 1/8 inch mark down to halfway between the 3.5-inch blades, so that's 1 3/4 inches. It's going to swoop down, and then it'll come down from there, which is a 1/4 inch up from the bottom of this rectangle, and there'll be a straight line from here all the way down to the end of the handle, which moves in just about 1/8 of an inch, so I get just a slight slope on the back of the handle. One of the nice things about being in a shop and using tools is that they do something for you and make your life easier. So one of the tools that I use a lot is a French curve as a drawing tool. Now, why try to draw curves on your own when you can use a tool that's designed that way specifically? And I learned about this in art school. It's something I use all the time to draw my curves on the bellies of all my blades. I marked off where I want my holes to be. I'm going to be using 2 Corby bolts to attach these handle scales. Now, I kind of drew this on the template, the prototype, and figured out how I'd want it spaced. And because of the bevels I'll be doing the handle, I wanted this spaced 3/4 of an inch in from either end of the handle, as well as evenly spaced between the top and bottom. I ordered this. This is 2 3-foot long pieces by 1.5 inches. This is 80 CRV2, and I got this from Janet's Knife Supply. I'm actually really happy. They did a really good job. They backed it with what looks like maybe 1/2-inch plywood. Comes nice and straight and flat. So I'm excited to use 80 CRV2. I've actually been watching and following along with Jason Knight quite often, Master Bladesmith, and he uses 80 CRV2, which kind of led me to it. The nice thing about this is that it's really easy and forgiving when you're doing heat treating. For this process, I'll be doing heat treating in the forge, and in the future I will be getting a nice heat treating kiln, but for now it should be really nice and a fun steel. My overall length of the blade is 7 3/4 inches, so I'm going to mark this at 8 inches and trim it off on the bandsaw. And I'll mark it with Blue Dykem and scribe around it to get my final shape. I'll cut off all the excess with the bandsaw, and I'll move over to the grinder to grind down to the final shape. While we're waiting for the Blue Dykem to dry, I'm going to show you guys a cool trick. And I'll set up my grinder. Something that I learned recently from Andreas Kalani. Just a way to be able to make sure that your bevels are centered evenly throughout your whole grinding process. For the trick, the first step you want to do is set your platen to about 45 degrees. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it kind of around there. Now, the next thing you're going to do is you want to grind at a 45-degree angle to those two center lines, making sure you leave a little bit, that kind of 20 thou before you do your heat treat. The nice thing about this is that after you do this grinding, all the other bevel grinding, all you're doing is going to that line, and you know you have a nice straight blade edge down the middle of your knife. Now that I have that edge established, I can set up to do the rest of my bevel grinding. The great thing about this new grinder is that you'll know from, if you've watched my past videos, that I've always been able to use my tool rest as a table that tilts. So I would tilt my tool rest back, and then I'd set up my angle for my jig for the grinding. Now with this grinder, I can actually tilt the full platen. So instead of having to tilt the table, I can just adjust the platen, and I'll adjust this forward to my angle that I want, which is about, right now it's 12, which will give me a 24-degree angle on both sides. And then I can just set this here. So now I can actually work with my actual bevel grinding jig on a flat surface, work it back and forth, and actually tilt my platen forward and give me that angle. All right, the danger of going back and forth like that between bevel grinding is just that eventually you're gonna go too far and you're gonna ruin that edge and ruin the knife, which I've done before. So before I get that far, I'm gonna stop. We'll go ahead and take this into the heat treat. All right, now I'm gonna be doing 3 normalizing cycles, which is basically heating it up and pulling it out and let it cool down before I do my final quench. Now the reason why I do my normalizing cycles on a blade like this, and a lot of people have asked, if you're not forging your blade out, why normalize? And the reason is because I always normalize no matter what. You don't know exactly how it's come from the factory. Maybe there's a little bit some inconsistencies or irregularities in the grain structure. And by normalizing every time, you're gonna make sure that grain is as fine as it's gonna be before you do your quench. Oh, can't do this yet. So you saw that I almost made my same mistake that I made in my very first video, the rookie mistake of not drilling my holes before I do my heat treat. That's imperative because once I do the heat treat, even if it's gonna go only through the blade, it's gonna move back some. You know, sometimes you get kind of mixed up and caught up in the filming and not the actual making of something. So I gotta remember those steps. You gotta drill your holes before you harden, otherwise you're gonna have to go back and soften that piece of the blade so you can actually drill a hole through. I'm going to be using Corby bolts for my fasteners for the handle material. These are 1/4 inch Corby bolts and they have a 3/16 inch shaft. And I want to drill that shaft really accurately in the handle. And the nice thing I'll show you real quickly in a side-by-side is that the Delta drill press is a little bit wobblier. It doesn't spin as true to the new Toolcraft, which is here on the right. And you can see it's spinning really nice and true straight out of me getting it and fixing it up. So we'll be using the Toolcraft drill press today to drill that really accurate 3/16 inch hole. I have the 2 main holes that'll hold my Corby bolts. And I'm going to go back, I'm going to switch out my drill bit, and I'm going to do a bunch more holes to just act as more material for the glue to go pass through and more bond for that epoxy on the inside of the handle. All right, this looks great. I got all my holes drilled and now we're ready to heat treat. This is 80 CRV2, so I'm going to be heat treating it the same way that I would do 1084. I'm going to use a chunk of mild steel to warm my oil. You want to warm up the oil just to make sure it's a little bit more viscous. The warm oil will actually quench your blade faster. I ground the forge scale off the spine because I want to be able to see the temper colors as I'm tempering this. So I'm going to take it upstairs. I'll temper this in my oven for 2 hours at 400 degrees twice, letting it air cool in between. I'll see you guys tomorrow. It's the next day and the tempering went really well. I'm really happy and pleased with the way it turned out, so I'm going to go ahead and finish grinding it now. As I'm moving up through the grits while I'm grinding, you'll notice that I'm quenching really often. I'm keeping my quench bucket nearby. That's because I'm already post heat treat and I don't want to make sure that I don't ruin the temper and already the hardness that's on the blade. So keep your quench bucket nearby, quench often, maybe 2-3 passes and quench, and you'll be good to go throughout your grinding process. So the flats are all ground now to 220 and the edges. And I'm going to come behind and clean up on my bevels again, get all those bevel lines really nice, and go all the way up to 220 grit as well. We've got all of our grinding done. Everything's down to basically the final dimensions it's going to be before I need to do my final sharpening. But there were a few little things that I found along the way. So trying to find that angle again was a little bit problematic. Trying to keep my tip in the middle, which is always kind of a sign of a good knife maker, is keeping that tip evenly in the middle. All these things that will need to be finessed and fixed before I do the final batch later. But for now, this is working pretty nicely. Everything's nice and straight and my bevel's right in the middle. So we'll go ahead and move on to working on our handle scales. Well, I've changed my mind and we're gonna start over. So let me tell you why. Well, the reason I decided to start over were a few things. So after I did my heat treat and I did my temper, there was a little bit of a warp in the blade that I didn't see until I started grinding the flats. And when I ground the flats out, it kind of brought that center line of the blade over some. So I tried to correct that with the grinding. And as I'm kind of grinding back and forth and trying to get closer to a zero grind, my tip was off, so I had to go one way and then a little too far that way and I had to come back, and then I hit the edge, so I had to grind it flat some. And all that is to say that basically I lost a little bit of distance, maybe about 1/4 of an inch on the end of my the blade tip, as well as maybe about 1/16 of an inch all the way around the blade. And I really want this knife prototype to be exactly what my design is and exactly the kind of shape of the wooden prototype that I've had. I really like the design and I want to make sure that I have that right design and the right prototype that I can use, so that way by the end of the summer I'll really know if I want to make any changes and I can make those changes and then hopefully bring you guys a really cool knife that you could purchase. The other thing which I thought would be kind of fun is that a lot of times in the comments when we're making these videos, people ask how long it takes us to make this. So whether that's the bow or a knife or an axe restoration, how long did it take? Well, honestly, I don't know how long these things take because we're always stopping and filming and answering questions and talking on video. So I thought this would be kind of fun chance to, I'll just set up my timer on my phone and I'll run through the whole process, get everything up to where we were before on this knife without stopping and talking, and just film all the way through. And we'll shoot that in about a minute or two and show you guys how long it would actually take without stopping and filming. So it should be fun, and let's go ahead and get started on that. just under 2 hours. While we're waiting for the knife to temper in the oven upstairs, we're going to go ahead and prepare these handle scales. Now these are maple that have been stabilized in black resin, and I got these from Brian House at the YouTube channel Housework. Definitely go check it out. He's got some great videos about making his own stabilizing machine and stabilizing some cool wood. So we're going to go ahead and flatten these out on the grinder and on the stones, and then we'll attach some liner material to it and get them ready to attach to the handle later. I'm going to continue flattening these by hand on my stone tile. Now that I have these flattened, I'm going to use some acetone to clean them off, but it'll also give me a good chance to look at the grain and decide what I want on the outside of the handle. It's the next day, and the heat treat and temper cycles went really well on the blade, so I'm happy with that. Also, the handle scales are all glued up now, and these are ready to go. So I'm going to clean up my flats now, get everything nice and clean, just to touch up my profile a little bit, and then I'll start working on my final bevels. so much happier with the way this turned out this time. Bevels are really even on both sides, and I worked up to a really nice convex grind. So I'm going to move back over to my plates and flatten the flats again. Well, my plan wasn't at first to hand sand everything, the flats and the bevels, but I'm really happy that I did because it looks much better this way with the convex grind and everything. It just looks really clean and really simple all the way down, which is what I was going for. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and protect the blade, and then we'll start working on the handle scales. I'll be using Corby bolts to attach my handle scales. Now these work mechanically, so they have a threaded interior and they actually crank and do a mechanical hold down with using epoxy as well. So I'll use this step drill bit now to actually drill a countersink into the handle that the head of the Corby bolt will fit into. I just dry fit everything up just to check to make sure it's all looks really good and it's lined up and it's really nice and even. So I'm going to go ahead and prep now and do our glue up. Nice. Nice. All right. The last thing we're going to do before we let this dry is we're going to clean up this front edge from any squeeze out with some acetone. All right, well, it's looking really good. I have squeeze out all the way around, so everything's nice and tight. I took off the cover and actually went in and cleaned up all that glue, any squeeze out from that front edge, so it's really nice and clean. Put that back on for safety. Now we'll let it sit overnight and we'll come back tomorrow and we'll start shaping the handle. With Corby bolts, they have the flathead screw heads on both sides. Now, they're designed to be able to grind down past that. It's only about a 1/16 of an inch or so, so I'll grind past that to get to the flat brass ends. And then once I get down past that on both sides, then I'll measure and mark off and take them down so I'm even on both thicknesses. My next step is going to be hand sanding this handle. And if you guys noticed, obviously I'm doing an octagon handle. I thought a little bit about why I want to do an octagon. It's not a very typical knife handle, but I like octagon handles on axes occasionally. It gives you this kind of purchase. Our hands are, all the joints in our hands are shaped like an octagon. So as you wrap your hands around, it actually fits in all those facets. You see facets a lot on kitchen knives, things like that. Not all that often on bushcrafting and backpacking knives, but I think it's going to be really nice. I like the feel of it. I like that I can set it down and it just like sits evenly where I set it. And I like the look of it. But that's why it's the prototype, because I have to obviously use it and feel if I really like the feeling of it over time. I kind of think that I will, but we'll see. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this prototype, for the intention to possibly make a run of these later in the fall to sell to you guys. I'm going to start with 220 grit and I'll work my way to 400, and I might go to 600, but I probably won't go any further than that. Well, despite my best efforts, This is one of the the banes of knife making existence is I still got a little bit of glue on the blade. Now I'm using just a bamboo stick with a little bit of acetone on it and just scraping it off. Now, the nice thing about using a piece of wood or bamboo is that it's softer than metal. So ideally I won't get any scratches on the metal. Alright guys, well I've come to the end and I am super pleased so far with the way this feels and looks. Really nice. And we're going to go ahead and finish it up now with a mixture of boiled linseed oil and beeswax, a 1-to-1 mixture. Now this is not something I think I've used on the channel before, but I've used it on axe handles and other tool handles, and I really like the feeling that it gives. The other benefit to it is I'll be able to take it over to the buffer and buff it up, and that wax will get a nice shine on the handle. Now that I have it nice and polished and finished up, I'm going to go ahead and sharpen it. I'm starting with a 150 grit belt. I'm going to go to 220 and then to 400. Then I'll take it over to the 1x30 with my stropping belt and get it nice and sharp. All right guys, well I am super pumped at how this turned out. It's exactly what I was going for when I made the wooden prototype, and I think it's gonna work really well. I'm gonna be using it throughout the summer, and I'll really get a feel for how it feels and how it works, and hopefully I would love to be able to produce this as the Art of Craftsmanship journey. But for now, this is the prototype. I think it's gonna be really great. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about this design in the comments. Let me know, and we'll try to maybe take that stuff into consideration in the future when we're actually making the ones to sell. Now, we just recently started a podcast, and we'd love for you guys to listen to that. We talk about all sorts of stuff that we do in the shop, including other videos we've done, and then we'll have some cool guests on, artists and designers and musicians and all sorts of people, other YouTube content creators, and just have these kind of fun conversations about makers. You can find us on the Makery Network, as well as all the other podcast platforms. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Art of Craftsmanship. If you've been there, you would have seen some kind of progress shots of this knife being made, and that's something you can see in the future. I try to put that stuff up all the time. It's just a nice way to follow along with the channel. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.